Hello everybody, welcome back to From Rhythm to Algorithm. We continue on with our derivation. What is the relationship of inversion and opposition? Wanted to return to that question because now I'm having second doubts about my analysis. But overall what I've said is true. We have this chronology, numbers and mathematics pair to physical systems. They pair uniquely to those physical systems. One thing, two things, three things. There was an order to those things physically stabilizing. And we were all born in what people say is 3 dimensions, but which is really, you have stabilized 2 things, right? You have natural opposition, positive and negative being the most fundamental, the electron and the proton. But you had things that happened in order. So we've been talking about things that are inverted versus things that are opposed. And so up until this point I said fundamentally that opposition came first and then it stabilized and you had the ability to be inverted. And now I'm thinking that is precisely and exactly wrong. Because, again, we're talking about this physical evolution change of the whole universe. And the universe literally means, logically, physically, everything. And so, how can you have, physically, how does that happen? Everything I've said up to this point about one thing stabilizing into 2 things is true, but that is, again, that's the word, right? Stabilize, it's ableized, it's able to be this thing. And so, but then the word that happens is you have one thing, how does that one thing differentiate? Does the concept of opposition, right? If you have one thing, how does that thing change? And so I want to say that it has to invert on itself. So now I want to say that the chronology of inversion, you have one thing, that thing inverts, and that inversion causes opposition. And so up until this point, I've been saying, you have these universal phase changes, you have one thing, it goes to, the physical stability is limiting entropy. That's for sure. That's why we have this extremely low entropy state at the beginning of the observable of our time scales. And so, but I don't think, again, physically, right, you have one thing and that thing differentiated. Absolutely guaranteed to be true. What word applies there? Can you have an opposite, right? How does one thing, and it's everything, oppose itself, right? It has to invert. So I'm thinking the chronology of these operations, if you want to, again, logical operations, we have thing, differentiation, differentiation by inversion. You have to invert yourself, again, meaning everything, to have some sort of opposition. So before I've been saying opposition to inversion, but I'm pretty sure now it's inversion to opposition. I guess we can test it out with our logic. What is the inverse of an opposite? What is the opposite of an inverse? And we'll get to a specific example right now. Do I want to do that right now? I'm not sure. But I definitely had that intuition now but everything I've said about the bounding is the same, right? Inversion, right? If you invert something, it's clearly not an opposite, right? What is the opposite of positive? You say negative, but we're just right there, this little clarification. How do you get that chronologically? And so, but regardless, talking about bounding, inversions or inverses is all the same. Again, that's the thing that's physically bounded. When you flip something, over 1 or under 1, then you have something like you can't divide by 0 or infinity is undefined. That's because you have not derived or established physical bounds to your mathematics, which we've done that now. But that is logic. I think that's the first thing I've gotten wrong. I think. And again, but remember, this fundamental iteration of what is sensorality encapsulates all of this logic and shows this, and I've already resolved this through speciality. Point being is this is the performance aspect of a derivation, which is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the right answer is, and I've already derived the right answer. But as you see how big this process is, you can mess up the same thing that you personally derived. And so I'm pretty sure that's you have to have to one thing to get to have once it reaches 0 entropy to stabilize a new internal property, it has to invert on itself. And so that's what I want to say there in a great way logically, right? When we just said, what is the inverse of an opposite, or what is the opposite of an inverse, right? You're getting some intuitions, I'm getting some intuitions, but there's chronology. There is a right answer to what came first, and we can see that reflected with our words. And so, right, an antonym is an opposite. We have something, we have some word that represents that thing: notebook, Brad, human, chair, ceiling, light bulb. And so we have an antonym that is not that thing. It's the opposite, right? An antonym is an opposite. And so the synonym, a synonym, is the opposite of an antonym, right? Yeah, that's correct. Important point to note that, again, antonym, synonym, clearly built on rhythm, like in linguistically, structure of the words. I'm at a point where I don't even comment on that. It should be overwhelmingly apparent. That's like a trivial proof of inconsistency. When you have logarithm, algorithm, all these other rhythm forms, right? That's the whole big chunk of the relationship of rhythm and vibration, right? Those are inverses of energy and entropy inverses. What did we do last time? Velocity and viscosity inverses, right? They're not opposites. It's two sides of the same coin. And so we're just getting the logical chronology of when these things came together. The bounding structure, inversion, is bounded where opposition is separated. It's two different, distinct things. And so an antonym is an opposite, and then we've demonstrated you have something, it gets a word. That word is unrevocable is another word I use, but like you can't remove the association of meaning to an object, to a physical process. And we just have to like truncate these different words to force other people's intuition to communicate information. And so our language is bounded. We're working definitely within that. Inversion is bounded, and that's why I think it has to be, if you have one thing and that thing is everything, to differentiate, to separate even at that point, you have to just invert on yourself, whatever that means, which is more specific than saying, you just have stabilized opposites, which you do. Again, that positive, negative, those are opposites. That fundamental stability of discrete, finite charge is the right thing, but that, again, there's two things orbiting one center, right? Two things to one, and then in all of your fundamental equations, you have one half, one half, one half. So when you're equating two things, it's like the base. You're trying to get to the base, right? The identity matrix is everything is everything. Point being is that a synonym is the opposite of an antonym. But, right, you assert some existence, notebook, not notebook, book, not book, and that's differentiated based on function. And so, right, the first thing that you're differentiating in linguistically is antonyms come first, because you have something and you say, well, it's not that thing. So you have an opposite. And so antonym, anonymous, just another word that popped out, but the opposite of an antonym, right? A synonym is the opposite of an antonym, but a synonym is not the same thing as, right, if you have one thing and you have an antonym, it's the opposite of that. But then if you have a synonym of something, it's similar. It's not the same thing, right? The identity is what it is. That's the same thing. I am I, me am I am me. That's the same thing. A synonym is the opposite of an antonym. Antonym and synonyms are opposites. Logically, you have antonymity to describe something, right? You have thing, antonym, and then synonym is the opposite of antonym. So, but they're not inversions, right? You have something, you oppose that thing, and then you invert. So again, this is kind of like, I don't know what's going on here. But it's definitely this functionality of opposition versus inversion, right? Inversion, you kind of have this negating prefix in, then you have version, it's close to universe. You have opposition, or you have position and verse. I have sensorality posits a verse. But what am I missing here? Again, back to our intuitions, energy and entropy being inverses, the capacity to do work versus the incapacity to do work. It's the same thing, it's inverted. They're not opposites. Synonym to identity is closeness, similarity, approaching sameness. And antonymity is the opposite of synonymity. But antonymity comes first, I think. We're getting at something here. I'm not sure what's going on. But what is the chronology of inversion versus opposition? Then opposite, linguistic structure, op. We did the ops, but that's not a as frequently used or frequently prevalent negating prefix, right? Inversion, version, inversion. I want to say, again, that's not one of those iteration things. I don't know. I'm trying to walk you through this, walk myself through this. Again, we always just teach ourselves. But again, this is the part where it's like, I've already resolved this. And so it's like, for this proof, to me to rederive sensorality, we need to get it done, but this is stupid. Not stupid, it's just, if you played Beethoven's 100th symphony, I don't know if there's 100 symphonies, and you got one note wrong at the very end, it's like, what is this? But regardless, again, sensorality with a C is the inverse of sensorality with the S. It's very clear that, me being mass is not different than the pool table. They're not opposites. It's just there's more to being life than there is to be inanimate. And so they're inverses, but they build. And so like you have a base, and then it inverts to differentiate, and then we chirality somewhere. Point being is, what is the opposition to inversion? Is that even the right question to ask? Why is this intuition striking me? And then what is this relation? Again, dichotomy, chronology produced dichotomy, that fundamental stability of positive and negative, two things orbiting, right? You have two things to create one period, right? If two things are orbiting, it still has one periodicity. And so periodicity is cyclicity. Periodicity is the product of cyclicity. We see that both with rhythm and vibration. And then fundamentally, two things orbiting each other. Because again, they're in mutual orbit. And so you have two things, 2 points to one center, right? The unique, and then we have that again, the center point, right? If you have 3 points, there's a unique center point. If you have 2 points and you have discrete objects, there's no unique center point between, like defined center point. And so what is the difference between opposition and inversion? A synonym is the opposite of an antonym. True. You have thing, then you say not that thing, and you say not that thing most severely by opposition, right? The exact opposite. It's positive, no, that's negative. If that's hot and that's warm, that's similar. But if it's hot and it's cold, that's opposite. If you invert hotness, you get less hotness, right? I guess the easiest is to see with infinitesimality and the speed of light. These two, again, infinitesimality and infinity are, it's a developed concept where it's just, again, the speed, right? You have the speed of light as our maximum and the inverse of that is the minimum, but they're both speed, right? It's both movement. And so inversion is clearly bounded. Physically, I don't think you can oppose, if you have one thing and it needs to oppose itself physically, it has to like invert on itself. What does that mean with charge is the word that this object is stabilized charge. You have positive and negative and they're in orbit and it's stabilized. That's why my notebook is here. It's not evaporating, changing. It's still here. So that charge is stabilized. Those charges orbiting have spin is another word we need to say. But that's why you have spin up or spin down. That's the fundamental dichotomy of these orbits. Like, which are we going clockwise, spin up, spin down, clockwise or counterclockwise? Which way is our orbit going? That's our complete, right? 2 points and then a line between them. You can either spin counterclockwise or not counterclockwise or clockwise, right? Not counterclockwise is clockwise, right? The inverse of an inverse is verse. The inverse of the inverse of the inverse of the identity matrix is the identity matrix. What's going on here? But we have bounding, opposition, but you have to invert to get opposition because there's no other thing. Once that opposition balances, meaning dynamic stability, orbit, two things producing one center, one periodicity, right? Periodicity is why timing is everything. Yeah, but definitely dichotomy, right? Chronology produced dichotomy. This dichotomy is an opposition. And so, just trying to talk through there. Kind of, again, mass, charge, and spin. Again, charge stabilized into mass. That is, we have this fundamental dichotomy, positive, negative, called the electron and the proton, and they orbit each other in a dynamic, and that stability is mass. Right, and there's gaps between that mass. Spin. All right, what are we spinning? What are we rotating around? Right, orbit is not spin. Spinning is internal axis, but there's no spin. Doesn't make sense if you have just a point particle, but mass is finite, but we can't measure that finiteness. We just know it's there. Because things are have definite locations. Quantum mechanics is fake news. Charge is the thing that's that's spinning. It's orbiting. Charge is orbiting itself, but the direction of that orbit of the positive and negative is spin. And it can either be counterclockwise or clockwise, which is really, again, another form of fundamental dichotomy. This or not this. This or that. So charge and spin, right? Those are the two big properties you have of matter, and it's true. But it's because charge is orbiting itself, so it's spin, right? Because orbit isn't spin, right? If something is going around like this, it's not spinning, it's orbiting. If it's going around and it's rotating internally, that's spinning and orbiting. And that's what everything's doing. The orbit, that's the orbital stability of charge is mass. That's literally physically what it is. And then the fundamental dichotomy is spin. And then why do you have positive and negative? Like, why is the size different? That still kind of pops up. Something's going on. I'm showing you every step of this realization process, and again, this is something I've resolved before. But just hitting you with some theorems. I have sensorality is revocability. And then again, just irrevocable is to me like when you're trying to remove meaning from association. You can't do it. It's irrevocable. It's stabilized. Again, meaning is stabilized. And so, or I have, it's stabilized with association. And so I have what is value to worth. Meaning is value, right? Words have meaning. What is meaning? Value. Run, jump, think, backflip. What's the difference between inversion and opposition? That is some conceptualization. You know what I'm talking about. So meaning is value. And I have that as the fundamental theorem of linguistics, right? That's what a word is, some amount of value. Value is definite. Definite is absolute. Hence, absolute value. Nice. Right, so as you see, again, like it's basically we're deriving all of these contractions of language, absolute value, speed of light, again, all of these forms of words, and you just like flip the logic. Absolute is definite. What is dichotomy to chronology? Chronology produced dichotomy. I'm trying to figure out inversion is definitely bounded. Opposition is separation. Fractions is discrete objects. That is the physical bounding. Not really understanding chronology, again, is why we have this dichotomy of acceleration, meaning changing speed, not just increasing. Charge, spin, mass, we just talked about that. Sensorality is vescensality, right? Effervescent, vescentality. Then we regeneralize that T to the S, right? QRST, so now we're going like backwards, we're uniterating. Because iterating differentiates, and iterating is this inversion process. And so we can see that directly with the letters. Again, we're almost done. That's what happened with, you get to this final and you just like literally switch one letter with another word. And it's like, oh, there's my solution. But I want to show you as much, again, when people like Terrence Tao, the great, is like, oh, I didn't publish my bad results. It's like, you can be precisely and exactly wrong. The purpose is to identify novel intuition, right? The fact that you have an idea, and again, if you have backing where it's like, this person's not talking total nonsense. Simply having that intuition where if you fuck up every single word, the intuition is what is relevant. And so, and then on top of that, personally, I have zero problem being physically wrong. But it's like when you reach fundamental synchronization, like you can be wrong, but being wrong just means not being specific enough or getting so close that you're precisely wrong, right? But continuing on, sensorality is sensality. The theme of effervescency is bubbles, right? I'm just blowing bubbles. Who's bubbles? But sensorality bubbles, right? If something pops up, if tension builds, right, it might be bubbling up. And so, right, we can state to bubble is not to pop, right? Then the fundamental theory of slang. Again, I'm just writing this as it presented to myself. Popping is the inverse of bubbling, right? We can see our chronology here, right? Clearly people say the bubble pops or pop the bubble. Go turn on economics channel for 2 seconds. But the point being is you can't pop a bubble if there's no bubble to begin with. And so, and I have popping is the inverse of bubbling, right? It's a physical process, right? Bubbling is frothy. Frothy is fizzy. The financial markets are looking really frothy. Don't worry, Professor Andrew Ross Sorkin. We're getting back to your book here in a second too, and the word frothy came up. But frothy is fizzy. Fizzy is bubbly. Physics is fizzy, right? Fundamental intuition changed by 1 syllable, and it's true, right? Physics, like fizzy, bubbling is a physical process, but physics is fizzy. Right? It's a fundamental iteration of is. That's all it is. But it has clear physical intuition. I definitely remember that theorem. That one's a fun one. But again, right, popping is the inverse of bubbling. You have to have a bubble form to popping. And so you have to have something invert itself to have the opposite of that. Right? To have the opposite of a bubble is to not have a bubble. But then, Brad, you just pop the bubble. That's not a bubble. I'm trying to show you, again, the progression of this language. It's really nuanced. I'm not sure what I'm trying to get to at this point. Again, the research is trying to ask the right question. What is inversion to opposition? What is inflection to inversion, right? The chart inverts. We have an inflection point, right? That's where something's inverting. We have an asymptote. We have some function growing really fast, and then it starts slowing really fast and then it tapers off, right? So like in inversion, when something inverts, it's like the point of change. Again, opposition is like separation. This thing compared to this thing. Dichotomy is opposition. Inversion is 2 sides of the same coin, right? Inversion inflects, inflection inverts. Inflection points are pivot points. So what is inflection to reflection, right? If you have an inflection point and if you reflect, right, reflection is opposition, right? Isn't it? If I'm looking at a mirror image of something and it reflects, right, it's not chiral. See, it's not inverted. Chiral is inversion. Inversion, chirality. Chirality is right here hanging out with us. He's right here. His name's Carl the Chiral. He's right here. Right? But it's true. What did I just say? Inflection to reflection. Inflection is definitely related to inversion. We just said those words. Reflection, right, is opposition. If I flip something, right, that would not, right, it would be symmetric over an axis, so it's not chiral. So what is the inverse of chirality? What is the opposite of chirality? Well, I'm onto something. Something's going on. I can't figure out what's going on here. But reflection to me is opposition. Inflection is inversion. Inversion is not opposition. But if you have one thing, you can't oppose. The way to oppose yourself is to, like, physically. Like, how does the prolapsed anus is right back. How do you, if you have one thing, it has to, like, invert on itself. But what is inflection to reflection? I think if reflection is opposition, inflection is inversion. So what is in to re? Definite is defined. Yeah, and then we're just right back to an antonym is an opposite. So when I have these again, you'll see my notebooks again. If MSRI doesn't destroy them, which I'm never going to send them a piece of thing again ever again, but I'm re-deriving. So I did a lot of re-derives. I like to kind of derive in order because typically when I do a video, it's like 4 seconds after I've done doing a derivation session, which again, it's physically limited. But this is definitely, again, a point where it's like, What am I trying to ask here? Because in sensorality with a C is the base, and then like when you uniterate, you have to again uninvert these things. And so intuitively, again, we haven't changed anything. The only thing that I think was wrong is chronologically inversion ordinates, or was like, you have to, as a physical differentiation, you have to have inversion because there's no other thing to like oppose. And then that inversion, specifically positive and negative charge, stabilized. And then again, that orbit is spin for sure. It's one thing. That's what I have for you today. And this is probably, again, the most open logic video I've made, where it's like I'm not even sure what I'm trying to ask right now, but I wanted to show you every step of this realization process. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.